All right, planet Earth, you wanted the best, you got the best.
Hey, this is not a test. This is rock and roll.
Dave Erickson, Mark Anderson.
Locked and loaded.
When it comes to talk, they're the purveyors of power, the bailiffs of bombast, rock and roll renegades.
We're about to witness the greatest miracle of the machine age.
Turn it up to 11. Here they are, Mark and Dave. Let there be rock.
All right, welcome to another episode of Let There Be Rock. I am Dave Erickson.
I'm Mark Anderson.
Thanks so much for joining us. This is going to be a fun week, I think, Mark.
Oh, yeah. I am so looking forward to this episode. It's going to be a lot of fun.
All right.
And a learning experience, too.
It is. You know what? It is. You shared with me some of the things that we're going to be talking about that I hadn't considered. I shared some things with you, some of my choices for this week that you hadn't considered. So it's fun and it's educational. That's what we do here on Let There Be Rock. It's fun and educational.
And you get homework.
That's why don't feel guilty if you're in school right now listening to us. Tell your teacher you're learning. This is valuable stuff.
Probably even better than stuff in school.
All right. The lesson this week, kids, the rock documentaries every rock fan must see. Now, okay, if we're going to talk about rock documentaries, Mark, I think we need to share a little bit of our criteria. We took a look at a lot of rock films and realized that there was a difference between a rock documentary and a concert film.
Most definitely. And that was a tough one for me. I mean, I wanted to put Led Zeppelin's Song Remains the Same in, but it really is more of a concert film than it is a documentary / fantasy film.
Yeah. Well, which is, I had wanted to put AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, but the same thing. It is more of a concert film, and there are some fantasy sequences. Malcolm Young is off playing soccer, and he's got like Keystone Cops music behind him. And then there's Cliff Williams, the bass player, flying around in like a biplane while Phil Rudd's driving a Porsche underneath him. That's not exactly a documentary.
Well, the best thing is that we both got to get out our Led Zeppelin and AC/DC per episode anyway, so we just did.
That's right.
So, and check.
Mark, check and check. Mark and I, we try to be subtle about it, getting our favorite bands in the show, and we figured out a way to do it. Although that wasn't really planned, but we did figure out a way to do it. All right, Mark, when we're taking a look at the documentary, a rock documentary that every rock fan must see, I know we're not going to put this necessarily in any particular order, but what first comes to mind for you?
Okay, so I know we have both seen this recently, and we had seen this in the 80s. One of my favorite documentaries by far, I saw that at the Midnight Movie when it came out, was Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2, The Metal Years.
Oh my gosh, that is an all-time classic. That could conceivably be the greatest rock documentary ever, probably for all the wrong reasons. It's to me, it's to rock documentaries is what Roadhouse is to cinema. Roadhouse is one of those movies with Patrick Swayze that's so freaking awful that it's great. You can't miss it. This movie, it tells you everything you need to know about the hair metal years on the Sunset Strip.
When I first saw it, I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I watched it like literally a few nights ago. It's like, this is so funny and so sad.
It was sad. This movie has it all. This is, if you're really a fan of the, a lot of guys who are still playing hate this term. Don't ever use the phrase hair metal around Michael Sweet from Stryper. He hates it. But, and a lot of guys hate that because they think it takes away from the music and it's insulting to the real musicians on the strip. But from that hair metal, quote unquote, era, this movie captures it all. And what I was fascinated by is that it didn't really talk about Guns N' Roses or Motley Crue or all of those bands really. It was really about the ones who didn't make it. And that's what made it so great.
And I think it talked about the funny thing you say with Motley Crue and Guns, the bands that were in the movie had former members of Guns and Motley in it. So it was kind of like the leftovers are in the movie and the real guys were already out making a living.
They ask all these guys, and all the first of all, yes, there were famous. Ozzy Osbourne was in there. They interviewed him. They interviewed Lemmy and
Alice Cooper.
To give you an idea of how idiotic some of these wannabe rock stars were. Ozzy Osbourne was the most lucid and intelligent sounding one in the entire movie.
Yeah, that is true, and he's making eggs and bacon.
He was. Some of the movie was staged. The director admitted that there's a scene in there where Ozzy spills orange juice. That was faked. Chris Holmes from Wasp, who was wasted most of the, he was pouring vodka on his head, but that was pool water. He kept filling it up, his bottle with pool water, but he was whacked out of his head anyway.
And I'm pretty sure when Paul Stanley was laying in that bed with all those women around him, probably was staged too.
That was what happened. I can't tell you the story there. Penelope Spheris, who is the director of that film, said that she had rounded up some girls for that scene, and Paul Stanley showed up to the shoot. He didn't like how they looked, didn't think they were good looking, so he called the Playboy Mansion, and they delivered 3 or 4 playmates who laid in the bed with him. Gene wanted to be interviewed in a lingerie store. He looked like a total perv.
Because he usually doesn't.
Then there's a guy who owns a club there named Bill Gazzari, the club there now in LA on the Strip is called One Oak, but it used to be called Gazzari's. And Gazzari is like this old fart who is hitting on 18-year-olds. It was disgusting. And then you have all the wannabes who all say, I'm going to make it. I don't have a backup plan because we're going to be rock stars.
And they all are not.
And not one did. Not one.
I will say, except for one, the guy in Odin.
The guy in Odin. Odin.
Jeff Duncan, he is an armored saint.
Well, Odin, that band, Odin, Seduce, there was
London.
My favorite scene in the film is when they were asking these people, what is your backup plan if you don't become famous? And the one girl says, I'm going to continue with my actressing.
How'd that work out for you?
Yeah, she's going to continue with her actressing.
I'm going to continue on my modeling and hopefully I get on with my actressing.
So you have to, we went on and on.
Yeah.
You got to see this movie, The Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2, The Metal Years.
And a side note, Lizzie Gray, who was the lead singer of London, passed away this week. So that's sad.
That is sad. But anyway, you got to watch that movie. It's a classic. It's so bad. It is great. It is everything that was great and everything that was wrong about the metal years on the Strip with the hair bands is in this movie. So you got to watch it. Okay, so they interviewed Lemmy for that movie. He was great, as he always is, which leads me to another rock documentary every rock fan must see, and that is Lemmy.
That is one powerful movie. You really learn a lot about him as a person, his son, and his hobbies. He's a very well-spoken person at the time. It was interesting to see just how more mellow. His music's so intense. He's just a mellow guy.
A lot of people, I think it's so important because we talk about Lemmy and everybody knows about Motorhead, and it's very easy to think about the hard drinking, smoking guy who plays very fast and very loud. And you don't realize how extraordinarily intelligent Lemmy was. He was a student of history. He was quiet. He had a million groupies over the years, but then he had a son that he adores. My favorite scene in the movie is when Lemmy's apartment was like a museum, a Motorhead museum. It's just packed with all these memorabilia, right? Everywhere.
Tons.
And so the guy asks Lemmy, what's your favorite thing in this room? And he goes, my son.
Yeah, that was pretty touching just to see that coming from Lemmy and knowing that he really does have a soft side, and his son hadn't been that close in years, and they kind of reconciled, and they talked about that very, very special moment.
And we learn a lot about Lemmy's love of rockabilly. We see him playing with Dave Grohl, who's in this film.
That's right.
And Scott Ian is in the movie talking about how he was afraid to mention to Lemmy that he thought his Daisy Duke cutoff shorts were a little bit much.
That was a pretty classic scene.
So this movie gives you a side to Lemmy that you may not have otherwise known. It is an absolute must-see. If you like Motorhead, you don't even have to like Motorhead. This is a great film, and it's called Lemmy. So very easy to remember. All right, speaking of rock legends, Mark.
Okay, and I just saw this band a week and a half ago, and side note, they were still amazing as the first time I saw them 25 years ago. Rolling Stones, Give Me Shelter. Such a different type of documentary. You still get the concert footage, but you see this band going through what they thought was going to be the second Woodstock on the West Coast. Is in Altamont, and it turned out to be an absolute disaster.
A disaster is an understatement.
Yeah, I guess that is an understatement.
You know what's so interesting about the Stones? It seems like they were always kind of followers. And they led the way in so many ways, and they were followers in so many others. You know, it's like the Beatles come out with not Magical Mystery Tour. They come out with Sgt. Pepper's. Of course, the Stones come out with their Satanic Majesty's Request. It seems like they were always kind of doing things second. So there was Woodstock. Here comes Mick and Keith and the gang trying to do something very similar, or we're going to outdo Woodstock. What an unmitigated disaster that was.
They outdid it in a horrible way.
Right. So basically a lot of people say this is what killed the love era of the 60s. So they had this concert. This film documents the efforts to put on this concert in 1969 on the West Coast. It was the West Coast version, I guess, of Woodstock. They originally had it at one place, I don't even know where, but then at the last minute, they moved it to the Altamont Speedway.
I'm pretty sure, yeah, my parents lived close to there at one point, and is south of San Francisco going to the east.
Right. And so they're there at the Speedway. It was hastily put together. There was a stage that was barely, if you watch the film, it looks like it's 6 feet off the ground, maybe lower. It didn't even look like a normal concert stage. They had almost no sort of security or facilities. And then somebody came up with the genius idea of hiring the Hells Angels to run security.
Because that was a really smart idea. They're tough guys, but they have no rules.
Yeah. And so it got progressively worse the more beer that they drank. I think they were paid in beer.
They were, I think, beer and possibly other stuff too.
Exactly. And so, so the movie starts, you see Jefferson Airplane, you see these bands playing, and by the time the Stones come out, the Hells Angels are wasted. They're beating people up. It's total and complete mayhem. There are people on the stage. At one point, Mick is singing. A dog walks across the stage. Then Mick is pleading with the crowd to try to calm everybody down. Everybody just cool out, cool out.
Come on now. That means everybody just cool out.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. That really didn't work out, did it?
No, there's Mick. I love the contrast because in the film, you see Mick going, everybody just cool out. And then Keith has had enough of that. He goes, hey, if you guys don't cool out, man, we're leaving.
Don't leave.
And then a guy gets stabbed. He's murdered right in front of the stage. And at that point, even Keith looks scared out of his mind.
We received word that someone was stabbed to death in front of the stage by a member of the Hells Angels.
I think that when they did the film, they kind of zeroed in on it. They had like one of those little halos so you can actually see where the murder took place, and it was really, really close to the stage.
And that was basically, they were all afraid. It could have been, you know what? It's so unfortunate somebody was killed, but considering the mayhem that this film is able to capture and what you see, it's amazing that it wasn't worse.
You know, I think one of the interesting things about the film is when they sit down with Mick Jagger and they show him the footage, and you could tell he really is hurting and feels so bad about what happened. And he knows that's not the band that they want to be as far as attracting that kind of crowd. And he had a lot of remorse going into that, you know, even though it was no fault of his. He wasn't the ones to hire the Hells Angels.
Yeah, that was a mess, but that is a definite must-see.
It's a fun one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'll feel very uplifted. And speaking of, that was the West Coast Woodstock. I know, Mark, you had a special place in your heart for the actual Woodstock.
Yes. And the actual movie Woodstock is a very cool documentary. It's very slice of that time. But boy, you need to take the whole weekend to watch that movie.
Whatever you do, try to find a way to rent it like as a regular film, whether it's on iTunes or you can rent if you find a DVD or something.
Or a VHS.
Or VHS, because if you watch it on a network that has commercials, seriously, it's going to be 7 hours.
You'll be here till the next podcast.
You will just put it on now and then tune in next week when we release the next podcast. That's how long it is. But it is, to Mark's point, to your point, it is a capsule. It's a really great capsule for that era.
And I think it's worth it just to see Jimi Hendrix. Plays it like at 4 a.m, I believe.
It was a Monday morning. It was the last day. It was it was very early in the morning. They were serving breakfast, and it's just, but you see how the thing came together. You see the challenges. You see what the people went through. You see the bands. It was incredible. I loved watching Santana. The performances were great. Greg Raleigh playing keyboards, who went on to form Journey. But my gosh, the music was fantastic.
You have a wide range from Hendrix to Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. All those bands at that time were there.
So Woodstock, definitely go see that or rent it. Be sure to see it. Well, however you got to see it, see it.
That's right.
All right, I'm losing my mind. All right, so that was the end of 69. Let's launch into, I'm going to briefly mention this because I don't want to take up too much time. In 1970, Elvis Presley made his comeback to the concert stage after a 13-year layoff. Elvis went off and he was doing movies throughout the 60s that we all know. He had that famous 1968 comeback special on NBC, but he hadn't performed on tour. He hadn't taken that tour stage in 13 years. The documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is, chronicles that whole thing. You got to see it. Elvis Presley is the king of rock and roll. You can't not see a movie about Elvis Presley if you're a rock fan.
Yeah, I agree. I said that with my dad when I was a kid, and I still recall seeing Elvis, with all his white jumpsuit and all the women around him. It was fun to see. And again, that's another slice of time. That's just music history.
Well, from the king of rock and roll, though, to the father of rock and roll, 1987, Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, a documentary basically run by Keith Richards. I don't know who produced it or directed it, but Keith Richards was the musical director. It was Chuck Berry's 60th birthday. They're having a huge concert in St. Louis, which is where Chuck is from. They did this documentary. Keith Richards, Eric Clapton, Robert Cray, all these greats doing this concert. And you learn a lot about the father of rock and roll in this thing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tension between Keith and Chuck Berry in one scene in particular. It is really pretty funny, and Keith was making a pretty good point, and Chuck was having none of it. Right. It is worth it just for that scene.
You give me more headaches than Mick Jagger,
Leave the amp as I said it. That's my amp, and I'm setting it the way I wish it.
because that's the way it's going to wind up on the film.
If it winds up on the film, that's the way Chuck Berry plays it.
Chuck was an opinionated mofo. He really was.
Yeah, he was. It was his way or the highway.
You really get to kind of see it and to hear the interviews. They did a lot of interviews with people about their experiences with Chuck Berry and about how great he is. And you hear from Bruce Springsteen. He actually played the E Street Band, or Bruce's band, whatever they were called at the time before they were big, backed up Chuck Berry at a local gig when Chuck blew through town. And that's what he would do, is he'd find local bands to back him up. And there were a lot of really great insider accounts of working with Chuck Berry in this. And so you can't talk about rock and roll documentaries, not talk about a documentary about the father of rock and roll. Hail, Hail, Rock and Roll, Chuck Berry, 1987.
Yeah, I'm gonna go kind of reverse how we had like the longest movie in history, which was Woodstock. It was part of the shortest documentary in history, which is Heavy Metal Parking Lot, and it's basically seeing a parking lot of fans at a Judas Priest concert, and it is so funny and cool. They were so amped up and so into Halford and the whole band. It's just fun. It's 17 minutes. Check it out on YouTube.
Well, yeah, Heavy Metal Parking Lot. I think this was in the late 80s. It was in Landover, Maryland. And yeah, it was 17 minutes where all they did was they interviewed these people in a parking lot waiting to get in to go see Judas Priest. And I think it's just, a lot of them were wasted, but it was so pure. Their love of metal and rock and concerts. And I feel like it's sort of a snapshot of a bygone era that I really miss.
I do too. I know I was one of those kids at shows in the parking lot, drinking beer and waiting for the show to start. And that's exactly how I felt. It's like, wow, I kind of like took me back in time to that era. It's like, I do miss that a lot.
Yeah. Plus, those kids probably spent $7 for those tickets. Whereas, they can hang out in the parking lot and there's a lot of young people, which I go to a concert now. You don't see kids who are 17 years old in the parking lot getting their, playing Priest or whatever band they're going to see. And I just think it was really a great snapshot. So heavy metal parking lot, which the only way you can see that, dial it up on YouTube. It's there. They actually have an extended version too. It's like 30 minutes. They have even more parking lot interviews.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It really is.
They also interviewed later on Rob Halford, who knew about it.
Oh, really?
I saw an interview. The guys who made the movie put a clip out there. They interviewed Rob Halford. He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, you know what? That's why we do this. So he spoke very highly of those wasted kids that they interviewed.
Well, they were really into him. They were they were serious metalheads, and they were all into Priest.
So heavy metal parking lot. All right, Mark, we are running tight on time, and we got a ton of films to get to. What's our next one?
One I think that everyone should see if they're into metal is Metallica, Some Kind of Monster. It's a train wreck.
It is a train wreck. It took them like 3 years to make. I think they originally hired a crew. They wanted to make a documentary about the making of the album that became Saint Anger. And it ended up, James Hetfield went to rehab in the middle of it. They hired a psychologist to try to help them work out their dysfunction. It was like a 3-year project or something like that. It's crazy, but it's an amazing look at what they went through. And when Jason Newsted quit Metallica, this documented how they got Robert Trujillo.
Which is, and just watching when they went through the lineups of different bass players doing the tryouts, you had the guy from Primus.
Yep.
You had a bunch of other.
You had a guy from the Cult.
Oh, that's right, the guy from the Cult. All trying out for Metallica. It's like, wow, all these bands that aren't even like metal bands that these guys are in want to be in Metallica.
And then Robert Trujillo comes along, and you could tell immediately this guy, and we said it last week, he was born to play in Metallica.
Yeah, he was. I mean, as much as I like Jason Newsted, Robert is like a step above his bass playing and more like Cliff Burton as far as that groove bass sound.
But you know what? The coolest scene to me, talking about Robert Trujillo, was when they told him, they bring him in, and they tell him that he got the gig. They wanted him to join Metallica. And they go into this whole thing. They said, look, we don't want you to feel like you're a hired gun. We want you to feel like you're a part of the band because you are a member of Metallica. So here's a check for $1 million. It's like, did you see his face? He was, oh my God.
He goes, yes, I am in. I actually, at that point, I kind of felt sorry for Jason Newsted because not only did he not get that $1 million, they hazed him for the whole Injustice tour, including the album.
Yeah, sad thing is Jason Newsted didn't do anything wrong. He had another band that wasn't even...
Echo Brain.
Yeah, it wasn't even remotely like Metallica. He was just exercising some creative, juices or whatever in another project.
Yeah, I think there was a James call on that, and I think James probably regrets it in the long run.
Yeah, and so Jason, I think it was over, and Lars, I've had my issue with Lars ever since the whole Napster debacle, and I think we're going to have to wrap it up. This is, by the way, announcement, this is a 2-part episode.
Yes, we just found that out.
This is a 2-part episode, but before we wrap this one up, talking about Metallica and Lars, there's a film called Mission to Lars. It's a documentary about this guy who has this syndrome that's kind of a sort of a Down syndrome type ailment, but this guy has a love of Metallica, and his mission was to meet Lars from Metallica. And so this journalist and the guy's brother or something, they come to America. They're from Europe. They come over to America and they try very hard to meet Lars Ulrich, and they ultimately do. And Lars was so amazing to this guy. I almost started crying because this guy was so excited to meet his hero. It kind of changed my opinion of Lars.
It's a really touching movie. I mean, just seeing Lars in a different light. You see Lars as a tough guy, metal dude from Metallica. He has a soft side to him.
Yeah, but and when that guy who met Lars, when you see the look on his face and his countenance changed. He had this huge smile. He was like depressed in this whole movie. And because he's got one of those social disorders, he wasn't very social, but his smile, he radiated the joy you could see in his face and his eyes at meeting the drummer from his favorite band. To me, just made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I may have to go back and rewatch it. It's been a while since I've seen it. It's a fantastic documentary.
All right, so guys, that's called Mission to Lars.
And one more Metallica documentary you can't miss.
Okay.
One more really quick.
Bonus.
That's right. It's a bonus. Is Cliff 'Em All. And it's a tribute to Cliff. They have footage of
Cliff Burton, the original bass player for Metallica.
Exactly. They have footage of the last tour when they're opening for Ozzy on the Master of Puppets tour. They have footage all in their interviews with Cliff. It's all like probably Super 8 film.
Wait a minute. I don't think I've seen that one.
Have you not?
Wait a minute. Maybe I don't think I have. I'm going to have to go look into that.
It's really good because it shows them going to this like probably 7-Eleven buying a bunch of beer, going out and partying, and then head on out to the concert. And it's after you know about Cliff and what happened to him with the bus accident. It's a nice tribute to him. It's a touch in a different way.
So this isn't the one where it talked about how he died in the bus crash, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm trying to remember whether I've seen this one or something else. I may be confusing films.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they mentioned they have interviews with that, but it's mainly just kind of tribute to Cliff.
And what's the name of it?
It's Cliff 'Em All.
Cliff 'Em All. Okay, so that is episode 1 of our 2-part mega episode, the rock documentaries every rock fan must see.
Yes.
All right. So I hope you're taking notes. Get your composition book out for next week.
And by the time we talk to you again, I hope you have seen at least 3 of them.
There will be a quiz.
There will be.
We're going to put it on the Facebook page, which be sure to visit facebook.com/WeTalkRock. Check us out. I don't know what platform you're on. We're on all of them now.
Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're on iTunes and Google Play.
All right. So there will be a quiz next week. Stay tuned. All right. I'm Dave Erickson.
Mark Anderson.
Let there be rock.
You've been listening to Mark Anderson and Dave Erickson's Let There Be Rock podcast.
Awesome.
Mark and Dave's opinions are theirs, and not necessarily those of whoever runs whatever platform on which you're listening. But if you don't agree with them, you probably think Jethro Tull deserved to win the first heavy metal Grammy.
What an idiot.
Let There Be Rock is an Anderson Erickson production.
Rock and roll!
It's one louder.